You good?
Good.
All right. And here we are for a Tuesday episode of Dualistic Unity Social. I just wanted to start off this episode by saying I'm really excited. I'm excited because today is a call-in show. That's one reason I'm really excited. I'm excited because we've had a few new, I guess, developments at Dualistic Unity that are really quite exciting, including somebody coming on to our sales team, another person coming on who's working through some college credit with us. There's new developments on the advertising side. There's new developments on the program side. We got some new stuff coming out, including a new yoga segment with Jackie and Andrew. So that's going to be awesome. But it's just I'm just feeling it, man. This is going to be a dope year, and I know it doesn't mean anything because we haven't actually crossed a line that's like this is a new trip around the sun, because that doesn't really exist. But I really feel this going forward. It's like, the Netherlands is really a chance for us to connect with a lot of the community, and now this is another chance to connect in a bigger way. The audience is growing, the conversation is growing. We've had a lot of people submit entries to the video contest where you can win a free ticket to our California mini retreat. If you don't know the details of that, definitely go to the website at dualisticunity.com. I'll also throw the QR code up on the screen here if I can just find it. There it is. So you can win a free ticket to our California mini retreat, which happens April 11th to April 15th. But there's just been a lot of movement in general, and I'm pretty pumped about it. And I'm really noticing that the community is finding a balance. And what I mean is that because this conversation can so often be confused with being a spiritual conversation, people often go into it with the idea that it must be pleasant, that it's about making each other feel good, that it's about reflecting quote unquote love, don't you know? And that can lead to a lot of misunderstandings. That can lead to a lot of people not challenging themselves, but just looking for a warm, comfortable place to hide. And I've noticed that the overall tone of our group chats, of our Discord, it's evolved over time in the same way that my tone has evolved and your tone has evolved. And I noticed that they were striking a really good balance in terms of empathy, and on the other hand, empathy, which isn't always necessarily appreciated, but we're challenging one another. And we're willing to sit there as we go through stuff. We're not judging one another as we get stuck on things, but it's important that we do that because that's how we work as a whole. In the same way, that's how we work well in ourselves, when we challenge ourselves, not when we're always letting ourselves off the hook and going, well, that feels good, I'm just going to run with that. Things always end up falling apart. And so the same is true collectively as a community. The same is true individually, which is what reflects in the community. And so I've just been really excited by everything that's been developing. And I just figured I'd go on a short little spiel there about it.
Fuck yeah, dude. And as you're going through it, I accidentally, instead of did the 3-finger swipe, I did a 2-finger swipe and exited out of Instagram. So I was able to reconnect and was able to get it back as you were finishing up. But it's funny how, the perspective of, this conversation, whatever you want to say, what the podcast is, shifts, because it's, for a while I thought of it as like an end all be all, like this is it, this is what something new that sort of defines me, like talking about how nothing's disconnected, and you're not what you think, and that's like that's my new thing. Talking about that. But and it's not to say that it's not fun to talk about, like we got into briefly on yesterday's episode live stream. It's going to be season 6 episode 9 that should be out soon whenever I can finish that one up, but it's very good so far. And it's starting to feel more like something that allows you to live your life and be yourself more easily. Like it's like a supplement or complement. I don't know which one exactly would fit better for this, but when you do jump in to new things, try new things, explore things that are unfamiliar, do things that make you uncomfortable, it can help to remember that it doesn't mean anything about you. It doesn't have impact on you no matter how it plays out. And so when you jump into something, like, you don't know how it's going to go. And that's perfectly okay. You're never going to know how it's going to go. And no matter how it goes, it's not going to mean anything about you. But it's not to say that, like, talking about this stuff is the thing that, like, you're going to do for the rest of your life. And that's why, and that's been something I've realized even with retreats, like early on with early retreats, like I just wanted to like stick to this conversation, it was my comfort zone more so was being able to talk about this because I felt like, oh, I've gotten pretty good at this and now I'm sharing stuff and talking to people about this. It's like, it's fun to delve into from time to time. It's cool when you got, a group of people who maybe recognize that they're not what they think. And there is a sort of collective understanding that, oh, maybe my thoughts aren't just mine. Maybe we're all hearing the same thoughts at all times. And there's an ease that comes with that. There's a state of relaxation that comes with that, but it's not necessarily about that. Cause it's like, say, hypothetically, everyone in the world did recognize that today. Like, oh, I'm not what I think. I'm a cell in this body of reality. And everyone just dropped all their fucking shit believing that they're whatever. And that changed like today. Like, what then? Right. And that's sort of what I'm starting to get a feel for is like, okay, sure. But then you got life. And like life has a sort of new flavor to it, a new tone to it, a new spice to it, a new excitement about it because it's more of that exploration now that there isn't, you're not trying to figure yourself out anymore. You're not trying to better yourself. You're not trying to become your highest self. It's like you are your highest self right now. This is it. You're it right now. Nothing to improve, nothing to become, nothing to overcome necessarily, but there's options. And without the need to do that, without that extra stress and tension of like, I got to get there, it's like, no, you don't have to. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to do anything. Then so much of that stuff, that weight, that more of the fear. It's not to say that fear doesn't come up because there's jumping in unfamiliar territory. Like there's going to be fear that arises. It's completely normal and natural for something that's unfamiliar to be frightening at first. Any experience, anything you've never done is going to be kind of scary. And that's why, you don't really see people jump into new stuff when they're adults. It's like the shift from a child to an adult is kind of when we stop jumping into new things. It's like, no, I'm adult now. I've figured out what I do, figured out what I'm good at. I've become an expert. I'm an expert in my field. It's like, okay. And you just fucking cruise the rest of your life doing that. It's like, because it becomes your comfort zone. It becomes familiar and everything does if you do it enough. And so it begs the question, like, what's holding you back from jumping into something new? And there's nothing I could ever say that to convince you. And I have plenty of my own shit that I'm like, yeah, all right, there's some stuff I'm afraid of. Let's jump into that a little bit more. But no one's going to tell you, no one's going to force you. There's not even a right or a wrong way to do it. It comes down to self-honesty. Like, what am I still afraid of? What am I still worried about? Why am I still worried about that? And oftentimes when you do start wondering, why am I worried about this? Then, like, well, because it means something about me, because I have this idea of myself and I'm trying to maintain it here and I don't want it to change or shift, despite not having any fucking idea about how anyone looks at you or what that idea even is. It's always just an assumption. And so this conversation circles around that when you're in those spots where it's like, whoo, I'm afraid, I'm worried, I'm scared. I don't know if I can handle this. It's like, it's going to get handled one way or another. It's not always comfortable. It doesn't always feel good, but that, to somehow, I guess, come around to your point, it's not about feeling good all the time. And when you let go of that shit, when you let go of this assumption, like I should feel good and comfortable all the time, then life kind of starts to shift because there isn't that assumption. So you wake up in the morning and maybe you're a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe you feel kind of down or bad. That doesn't become your all and everything of your reality. It's not like I can't get out of bed until I feel good. It's like, but what if getting out of bed helps you feel good? And then we got a chicken or egg situation, and that's almost always the case. It's almost always, no, you jump in and then things play out. It's not, I got to figure this out and then I can jump in. It's always more or less the opposite for the most part. It's very rare that you feel really good about something before you jump in because you're jumping into uncertainty. You don't know it. And then once you jump in, it's no longer so uncertain, so unfamiliar. It's a little bit more familiar. And so that's sort of the shift is just, it's not about uncomfortable to comfortable. It's like unfamiliar to familiar. And the only way to become familiar with something isn't from reading a book. It's not from watching a video. It's not from listening to us say anything. It's from jumping in and becoming more familiar with it.
Isn't that delightfully unsatisfying? Because that's we want it to be more complicated, because then if it's more complicated, then I don't have to do it. There's lots of reasons I can't do it. It's complicated, right? Otherwise, it's just simple, and then that's just on me. Why don't I want to do it? Where's that hesitation coming from? And that's, man, it's so funny how much the weight we carry just becomes life after a while. Like, we really just don't recognize that you don't have to be thinking about yourself all the time. I know for me, it was mind blowing when I just recognized how much I was, in fact, actively participating in maintaining this fictional world called Ray. All of my thoughts went into it. If somebody said something to me, it wasn't just about what they said, it was about what it meant about me. It's about how they looked at me, what their tone was, how that reflected on me. I always made assumptions that everything had something to do with the world of Ray, this fictional world of Ray, instead of just being the world I was in. And we've talked about this before, just being so caught up in your head that you're not actually listening to the person you're talking to. You're just waiting for your turn to speak so you can jump in with one of the grab bag of automated responses that you throw out, knowing this is societally and socially usually pretty good. This will get me through the conversation till I can leave, right? Usually people laugh at this, and it's something that you've said 1,000 times because you know it's more than likely going to succeed. And why are you doing that? Well, because you don't have any faith in your ability to just say something. This is something I see in teenagers all the time because, as you know, I'm a father and my daughter has teenage friends, and they all kind of go through the same rotation of topics and points of view when you listen to them enough. And it's because they're all just kind of piggybacking off of one another because it's comfortable. And then we all agree. And look, this is the same group that we're in. But for one of them to suddenly go, "Hey, have you guys ever heard of blah, 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 blah?" Out of nowhere, it's almost unheard of. Well, why? Well, because anybody might think anything about it. How does that reflect on me? And isn't that a shame? Because how many interesting things are we not discussing because we're terrified somebody's going to judge us for talking about it? How many things are they not talking about? How many things could we be learning if we were to just remove this fictional character from the conversation so that way it's no longer valued according to how people perceive what it expresses? We would learn so much more, and we'd take in a lot more, and we'd talk a lot more, not just for the sake of talking, but for the sake of actually saying what we mean. Because that's another thing I've noticed about teenagers very often. They say a lot of nothing very loudly. And it's because they want to feel like they have things to say. And it's not that they don't have things to say, it's that the things that they have to say, they don't want to say because it represents some kind of insecurity. Because when you really talk to a teenager, they will be insightful as fuck about the human condition, about going through suffering, about the nature of relationships. But they never talk about those things. Because to talk about those things is somehow indicating some kind of a weakness, or it's going to end up triggering some insecure asshole around them in their life. And so again, it's always this, well, I got to think about myself to protect myself from these people who are protecting themselves. And it's so counterintuitive. It's like, no, just be vulnerable. Let them judge you. Let them judge you all day long. This is something I always found funny about people who are afraid of quote unquote energy vampires. It's like, wow, you are assuming that you have like a very little amount of energy. Oh no, they're going to take it. It's like, go ahead. All day long, you go right ahead. And it's because you are always going to need more, whereas I don't, which means I'm not afraid of losing it. All right. There's nothing to lose. It's a limitless supply because I'm it. It's not an energy you can take. It's energy maybe I'm willingly giving up. And that's the problem. People who often complain about energy vampires are usually the people who are enabling those vampires. And so rather than just say, no, I'm not participating in that game and appear to be the dick, they will be the nice person and then complain about it after the fact.
That's That's funny because because they're not willing to say anything in the moment, and then it almost is always then a complaint after on social media complaining about something, and then, if you ask someone, "All right, you're bitching and moaning, you're complaining about this, like, what'd you do? What'd you do when they were when they were doing it?" They're like, "Well, nothing. They had all sucked all of my energy. I couldn't do anything in response. I had no energy left." It's funny how much, oh my god, like, people will complain about something, and, like, I'm not talking about this from someone who doesn't do I'm talking about this from very much from the spot of, I can't think of anything off the top of my head of when I do this, but you'll complain about something, but then not do anything about it. You'll bitch and moan about something, about, even like problems of the world, what everyone's doing wrong, what, the right's doing wrong, what the left's doing wrong, what this is doing wrong, what that's doing wrong. And then as soon as, you're talking to someone, maybe they're bitching and moaning about that, and you just bring up like, well, what have you done about it? Like, what could you do about it? And they're like, well, I'm not in a position. Those people are in the position. So you can't do anything about it. There's not a single thing you can do, because you seem to be pretty gung ho about what the wrong things to do are here, about what the right thing to do is here. But you're gonna you have a day right now. You're not going to bed for a while. It's like, what are you doing? And it's like it's frustrating. And I'm not always like that, because I'm like, oh yeah, there's stuff that I say and like I don't necessarily immediately do about it. And then and then sometimes they'll be like, well, what are you doing about it? Like, I'm not bitching and moaning about that, assuming that I know what's best and that person doesn't know what's best. I actually don't know what's best. And then there's like, usually some frustrated back and forth a little bit. But it's interesting how quick we are to complain about stuff and how slow we are to fucking do anything about it at all. And it's so much easier to, after the fact or from a distance, complain and bitch and moan about stuff. But like when you're in it, when you're there, it's like most people don't want to sacrifice the discomfort, their own comfort, for saying something or doing something about it, despite having all the ideas about what could or couldn't be done, because they don't want to sacrifice, like, well, I feel kind of good right now, and I might not feel kind of good if I get into that discussion. I might get frustrated. I might get, you know, they might respond in a way that gives me more context, and then I won't be able to hold on to that right thing that I'm holding on to so much. If I actually have a conversation, there might be more considerations that come into play. God forbid I have a conversation with someone who maybe has a differing perspective, because not because you won't learn something and you're afraid of that, although that is kind of it, but like you won't be able to hold on to that false certainty so tightly. So they go hand in hand. Yeah, you'll learn some stuff that then will widen your perspectives of things. But as long as you're maintaining, it's so fucking wild how people will maintain perspectives on things, like without a shadow of a doubt. Just be like, "Oh, this is the right," and have no desire to learn anything more about it, consider other things, maybe take in different perspectives, like none at all. And even if you were to bring up to them like, "Well, have you ever talked to someone who maybe is from a different area, different socioeconomic class, different situation, someone who grew up differently than you?" Because there's a situation out there where you think the exact opposite of what you're thinking right now. If you were just given different context and you start having that conversation, it's like, well, yeah, but I have my context right now, and that's all I know. My perspective of reality is reality. It's like, no, it's your perspective of reality. And there's a very, 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 very important difference between your perspective of reality being reality and it not being reality, but just being your perspective of reality. Like one little tiny point of view, just because it's reality to you right now doesn't mean there isn't a way to open up the tunnel vision or the blinders a little bit and maybe shift your perspective of reality. But you have to be willing to maybe have an uncomfortable situation, maybe go into. And the thing about those going into those uncomfortable situations is they're a lot less uncomfortable when you're not holding on so tightly to your point of view. When you're going into it, like, I don't really know what the right answer is. Let's chat about some stuff because I have some perspectives, but you have some perspectives. But because people are holding on so tightly, they don't want to jump in to those because then it brings into question whether they are right. And they'd rather just avoid the potential of being wrong than jump in and find out if maybe there's, a way to gain a little bit of context on something.
Yeah, and it gets worse depending on like how I guess how much of their community is involved with the particular belief that they're holding on to, because then it's not just about questioning what you believe, it's about questioning your very place in the world, which is usually attached to the community, which is attached to the foundational belief. I'm specifically talking about religion, but it's also nationalism. It's another perfect example, right? And it's just that fear of being shunned, being abandoned, of being judged by your peers, of no longer fitting in with the people who have raised you, the people who were so certain about their own place in the world. Like there's a lot that goes into questioning your perception, because your perceptions as you get older are really rooted in some basic desire to figure out what the fuck is going on and how do I get through this to the best of my ability. So in communities that have all the same belief, you learn how to very much adapt to that environment. And then when you meet other people outside of that community and they don't share that belief, it rattles you. Because now it's not just about questioning the belief. Now it's about questioning the whole world. How do you fit in this now? This doesn't have the same foundation. How do I relate to people? This is why people stick to church. It's why people, identify as being American, or people identify as being Canadian, or people identify, as being a certain color. Like we're just looking for some foundational thing that ties us to other people, rather than, the obvious that we're always tied to other people. And so it's really interesting. I wanted to mention, just because we're about 25 minutes into this, we have a live call-in show at the end of this hour. We're going to be hosting it twitch.tv/dualistic unity, or go to our YouTube channel. You can watch it live there if you don't like as many Twitch advertisements, though apparently if you are a Twitch subscriber, you don't see advertisements. But anyway, it's a live call-in show, which means that if you have a question, or if you want to share a story, or if you just like to tell us what you think of the podcast, because we'd really appreciate that. And of course, those clips are helpful to promote the podcast and tell other people about the podcast, because it's one thing for me to say I love this podcast, but of course I do, I work here. So if you could join us and let us know what you think, or just ask a question, or express a problem, or don't do anything, just shoot the shit with us, that would be great. You can join us for up to 10 minutes on the live call-in show. We got a little timer and everything, so nobody cuts you off quickly. And you can talk about pretty much anything, and you really do help the community, because what you're doing is you're inspiring other people who might be a little bit timid, who might still think that it matters whether or not they go on the episode, into doing so. Because isn't that the funny part about it? We actually think it matters. So many people have come into a group or onto the live call-in show, and they get there and they're like, "Oh, coming into this, I was super nervous. Oh, I was sweating. My heart's just beating." And it's like, there's not a test. There's no test after this. Your rent isn't going to be influenced by it. Your job's not in any way, and this doesn't go into your college credit. Like there's nothing about this that matters, because if anybody watches it and they don't like what you're saying, that just goes into the pile of other shit they don't like to listen to. It's not like it matters. They're going to move on with their life. You are not as important to other people as you would like to think you are. And that is a real kick in the ass. That is a big part of why we'd like to think that other people are judging us so much, because there's some importance in that, right? If other people are spending that much time thinking about me, I obviously have value. You have value, and nobody's really thinking about you that much. You know, both of those things are true, and it doesn't matter. That's the whole thing. So you can just let it go. Come on the show, have a conversation, and then after the fact, just be stoked about the fact that you did it, and that pesky fear that it can't be done will be gone, because you will have done it, and you will prove yourself wrong yet again.
Oh, well said. Yeah, you can't fail on our calls on anything at the end of the day. And because you can't succeed. Like you get on, say, just in this example with a call-in show, like you get on, you can't, there's not like a successful getting on the call-in show. There's not something that's gonna be so crazy that it, like, solves the world. You know, it solves even someone else. And who's to say that you getting on and being like, "I'm really nervous right now, but I'm here. I don't even know if I can talk right now, but I'm here." And you just breathe in. And just that right there, like, cut, jump off the call. You're like, "This is too much. Exit." Like, someone seeing that is gonna be like, "Holy shit. They were nervous and they got on. Holy fuck." Like, we to your point, we make this assumption that people must be thinking about what we're saying. What we say is so important that if I don't like, then there comes in the hesitation of like, well, gotta make sure I say the right thing because it matters so much. And it's like there's the one side, it's like, oh, I hope no one thinks what I say is dumb, but it's kind of the assumption that you can say something that's not dumb. It's like, what if everything we're always saying is kind of dumb? It's like to someone who doesn't speak English, this sounds absurd right now. Like imagine if we were speaking, I'm guessing most people on here don't speak Mandarin. Imagine if we were speaking Mandarin right now. We would sound like, you know, crazy if you didn't know that we were actually speaking another language. You'd be like, they're making some really strange sounds right now, and they seem to be going back and forth and seem to be communicating fairly well. But and so there's this assumption that like of importance in a sense when we're concerned about ourself, but it stems from that desire to be thought about, to be, like you said, to be valued. And like, oh man, and it's funny because like a lot of my initial content, like a lot of it was like, nothing matters, blah, blah, blah. It's funny going back to some of those old videos because like there's certain types of videos that I'll post and I'm like, oh yeah, kind of saying the same thing now. I'm a lot more rigid as I'm saying it, but there's certain things that are like, it's a part of it for sure, but it's a very, you know, some serious blinders on with that. And there was another type of video that I was going to bring up that wasn't the nothing matters. Yeah, it was the no one like just no one gives a fuck about what you do. And like I would talk a lot about that. And like I don't know, I've kind of like forgotten that a little bit cuz there's an extreme with that where it's like, well, there's sensitivity and whatnot. It's not like, running around like a fucking bull in a china shop, just like, nothing matters. No one gives a fuck. I don't give a fuck about any of you fuckers. Fuck all of you. I'm going to do whatever the fuck I want. I don't care at all. And there's a balance for sure. But, on the sensitivity side, that balance can swing too far to the point of like putting yourself in a fucking locking yourself in a room and just never doing any interacting with the world because of the extreme of the over sensitivity to the point that you assume that like everything that you say has so much impact and matters and people are hearing everything that you say exactly how you say it and they even care what you say like that much. Like it must have some degree of impact. Like, how much just thinking about what I've heard today, like I've had some conversations with some people and like right now there's been a couple things that have stuck, but it's like, I don't know, a percent of a percent of a percent of a percent of like what's actually going on. And so you think about your interactions throughout the day, it's like a percent of a percent of a percent of a percent is going to be, you know, noticed or recognized or remembered for more than 6 hours. There is a lot. It's a lot. Your experience is a lot lighter. There isn't so much weight of like, because even that assumption, because if you're in a situation and you're worried, nervous, afraid of like jumping in, saying something, taking something in a different direction, like when you've done that in the past, how long has there been any carryover or response to it? Usually it's like split second, it's like, what did you just say? Like, that was a weird thing to say. And then immediately, if you're not taking yourself seriously, you could be like, yeah, I don't really know. I was trying to say this. And then you start talking, then there's a back and forth and like, and then it leads to something. That's something else too, is like in conversations, like we can put so much weight on like one thing that we say, but like a lot of times there's things built. It's always things built off of things being said. And so what you're thinking maybe may not be like a full fucking novel, perfect beginning, middle, end, hero's journey type shit, but it could be a component of something unfolding, a conversation unfolding, and it doesn't have to be complete or a fully fleshed thing or thought. But fucking A, dude, we can put so much pressure, and by we I mean me, of course, as always, on ourselves to like, oh my God, to like be perfect, kinda. It's like fucking crazy ass expectations. Like, who am I even being perfect for? Like, for me to stay refrain from being uncomfortable, if I, got rid of that idea and I'm like, whatever plays out, I'm good with being uncomfortable, like unsettled. And then there isn't so much concern at all because you're not trying to maintain a certain feeling. Like a lot of that is I think a lot of that is what that comes down to is like just how I'm feeling. It's like I don't want to feel uncomfortable or down or bad. It's like, what if I'm cool with that? What if I recognize that feeling down or bad or uncomfortable is where you build strength? And it's like there's more of a push to be a little bit less comfortable or not feel as great all the time.
Oh man, so much of what we do goes into how we're perceived, right? But you can never control how you're perceived. It does not matter what you do. Like if you're perfect, somebody's going to judge you for being too goddamn perfect. And then what are you going to do? Oh my God, I'm not perfect enough. Like, what are you going to do? You can't go become more perfect. And you see, that's the whole point. There is no such thing as perfect. It's just I guess, a way for us to once again establish some sense of value and progress. But we keep trying to modify how we are perceived by everybody. Like, we don't want to be too sweet. We don't want to be too spicy. So we've settled for just being fucking water. Right. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, except for that there's no flavor one way or another. And so, hold on a second. Siren going by. It's not a bad thing necessarily, except again, there's no variance in that. So, in order for us to be, I guess, somewhat certain that nobody's going to get very upset with us, we just have to kind of guess what everybody else is going to do and like. And that's why it's so very common that we fall into certain common mentalities. This is what Lego Movie was trying to get across. You remember? So, what kind of restaurant do you like? Any chain restaurant? What do you watch? Where's my pants? What kind of music do you listen to? Everything that's on the radio. And it's like that is a common mentality, and we all feel very comfortable in that world where we all know the same things, we all talk about the same things, we're all interested in the same things, right? Because it's very safe. I mean, how many people felt left out of the loop when, I don't know, Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad or Lost was playing and you just weren't watching it and everybody around you was talking about it? You felt out of the loop, right? You felt awkward. People would be like, "Did you see what happened with blah 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 blah?" And they're like, "I haven't actually watched that show." Oh, and then they go back and talk to the other people that they know about the show because that's where it's comfortable. We do this naturally, subconsciously. Like it's one of those things. We want to feel like we belong, unless you are actively aware of that tendency. Unless you're actively aware of that subtle influence that comes from fear that's always been there. We grew up in a world that's uncertain, and so we've always been looking for a way for that uncertainty to go away. It's just that we haven't recognized it, and so we have so many things that are just kind of knee-jerk reactions to uncertainty without any awareness of the fact. Right? But once you become aware of the fact, then it changes what you do. All of a sudden, you're just like, "Yeah, I like that show. What's that? A show I haven't talked about or watched? I'm very curious. I'd love to find out more." There's no awkwardness there, or yeah, I really don't have any interest whatsoever. Give you an example, and I find this funny for the amount of comments we've got to our clips and podcast videos and whatnot, saying, "Is that Walter White?" I've never watched Breaking Bad. Never watched it. Never watched it. People for years like, "You've never watched Breaking Bad?" I've never watched Breaking Bad. Crazy, right? And I've seen clips and I've seen interviews, and it looks like a dope fucking show. Glad to hear about it. You want to talk about Breaking Bad? I will listen to you because it sounds cool. Jesse, the whole operation, fuck yeah. And I've never watched it. Never sat down and watched a single episode, and yet I will share your enthusiasm about it because I don't give a fuck what I don't give a fuck that I don't know about it. Sounds like a cool story, right? And that's the point, is that that awkwardness isn't there. That awkwardness isn't there because I'm aware that it would only be there if I somehow felt like I needed to fit in. But since I don't feel like I need to fit in, I'm still focused on my experience. And my experience is there's some information here that I can learn from. And that's what I focus on.
Yeah, well said. Oh man, it's so funny how that mentality of like it's like herd mentality, and we talk about it in certain contexts, but like not in literally, like, basically everything we do and how we live our lives is some for the most part, unless you're being yourself and just, like, not looking around so much, like, you're experiencing a variation of that, of herd mentality, and, like, it's so, so common to do that, and even to do things just because other people are doing them and just for that. And like Breaking Bad, for example, like if you took everything that everyone ever said and was like, "Oh yeah, I can't believe you haven't have you not done that?" And like you couldn't do all of that in your lifetime. So you got to be willing to be like, all right, is this something I actually want to do right now? If the answer is no, it's like, then don't. And if maybe at another point, maybe in 5 years you start watching Breaking Bad and you're like, oh, this was a good show. It was always there as an option, but it's like if it's like we always rush into the things because we don't want to. It's like extreme FOMO. It's like fear of missing out of what is being discussed, what is being talked about. And yeah, again, shout out. We got a call in show, 6 p.m. Eastern time. We will be on for hour 45 minutes. So we'll be able to get up to like 8, 9 people. Wait, no, like 10, 10, 11. Regardless, around 10. You should call in and chat, and it's a lot of fun. And don't dilly dally because usually by the end there's a bunch of people who want to get on and they can't. So hop on quick, or else you're gonna have to just listen to us talk back and forth for a little while, which is fine, but it's more fun to get into it. It's a lot less fun to watch. It's more fun to get involved and actually do stuff and stop sitting on the fucking sidelines your whole goddamn life. Because you could do that, but there's probably gonna be a point where you're like, fuck, I wish I played a little bit more. I wish I got in there because when you aren't in your way so much, like there's a lot of things you can do in life. Like hypothetically, in a scenario in which you never judge yourself ever for anything and like didn't really overanalyze or think about too many things, like imagine being in that situation. Like the world kind of becomes your playground in a lot of ways. Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I'm not sure what just happened. Was that you or me?
Yeah, no, I'm playing with my fucking wire over here, and
Fair enough. That is an interesting way of putting it. So, while Andrew plays with his wire, I just wanted to mention that the world has always been our playground. Isn't it funny that that was obvious as children and we totally fucking forgot it? Nothing has changed, man. Nothing has changed except that we grew up into the world where there are certain expectations. And why are those expectations there? Well, because there are certain responsibilities that go with surviving and living in the world. But a lot of the expectations have nothing to do with survival. They have nothing to do with the common good and everything to do with this fiction of you measuring your value, comparing yourself to assumptions, doing that whole thing. Dear God, does this coat make me look like I'm not desirable? It's like if you really think whether or not you're desirable comes down to your coat, you got other fucking problems, right? Because it's not the coat. And if you're basing any relationships based on anything superficial, you're going to get superficial relationships. And so you need to think about that shit. Right? That's as simple as it goes. But when you let go of all that superfluous shit, when it's really just about living, which is ridiculously easy at the end of the day. You just keep breathing and eat, sleep, go to the bathroom, that kind of thing. But when you're judging your progress all the time, it's a fucking nightmare. And it makes it impossible to want to connect with other people. It makes it impossible to go into any situation without thinking that you're going to be judged or your value is going to be diminished because you don't fucking know. Like, it changes everything. Everything. And all you have to do is just walk into it and recognize whatever your brain spits out about the fiction of you will change in about 5 fucking minutes if you just don't hold on to it. That's the crazy part about it. We're like, oh God, I got to deal with this. I can't believe I think this terribly of myself. Just don't hold on to it. Just stop trying to think your way out of it. Stop thinking if you think about yourself differently, that you're somehow not going to be suffering through the consequences of thinking about yourself. Because it's not thinking about yourself negatively that's hurting you, it's overly thinking about yourself. Because as long as you're thinking about the fiction of you, you're thinking about your value. And that is always something that can be raised or lowered, which means that you're always threatened, which means there's always a right way. And now you're in an entire hell of your own. And you just don't need to do it. You don't have to make it that complicated. And a lot of our world is just based off of that. Just the fact that we forgot it doesn't need to be this goddamn complicated.
Yeah, holy shit. It's gotten fucking complicated in so many ways. That's just not when you bring it back to basics, it's like, it's not that complicated. Wow, I'm just making my life way more complicated than it does need to be. It's not like there isn't complications to life. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot of variations, a lot of considerations, a lot of things to, you know, keep in mind to a point, but at the same time, not really, because a lot of those things that we keep in mind are just getting in the way from actually being able to live. And as we're keeping them in mind, it's like we're stumbling as we go, keeping them in mind, maintaining certain ideas and perspectives. And so much of the shit we keep in mind is just ideas about ourselves. Where's my value lie now? Oh, this happens. Oh, where's my value lie now? How about now? How about now? How about now? How about now? And then when to your point, like when you're thinking about yourself positively or think you have a positive, you're maintaining this positive idea of yourself, it's again thinking about yourself. And that then oftentimes leads to brutal situations that cause that value that you're looking at up here to just like what is it? The phrase pride goeth before the fall in a big way. That's certainly the case in so many of our just relationships in general, specifically like romantic relationships. It's funny how, you'll get dressed up for a date. I'm not saying like don't get dressed up for a date necessarily, but there's a balance between am I doing this to look a certain way, to be perceived in a certain way? Like, I'm not saying go to a date with bedhead necessarily, but at the same time, like when the fuck did hair being put in a certain way mean that you were taking something more or less seriously? Does the seriousness with which you take a situation not just come down to how much you're paying attention in the moment? Does it maybe have absolutely nothing to fucking do with anything that you're wearing or looking like or doing? It's like you aren't what you're wearing, what you're looking like, even what you're acting like. It's like right now is the only place you can actually meet someone. And yeah, the further you get into the thoughts about what it means about you, what it looks like, what you look like, what you're acting like, what that means, the further you're going to get from genuine, authentic relationships. I know we're getting close to time here.
Yes, we are. For everybody who's watching, we're going to be here. If you're watching on Twitch or YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook, we're going to be there back in 15 minutes for the live call-in show. We did have one comment in Instagram, and it was, but the fiction of me is someone's reality of me. Now, this is something I've heard often as an argument. It's like, you don't have to think about yourself. It's like, right, but somebody else is thinking about me, so I got to worry about what they're thinking. No, they're thinking about themselves. See, they're not thinking about you. Their fiction of you is very much their fiction of themselves. Whatever they're judging you for, they're judging themselves for. And if that's the case, why are you catering to somebody who's judgmental? Why are you catering to the superficial? This is a really important question to ask. It's like, what if they are judging me? Then you probably shouldn't be enabling that. You're not helping anything by catering to it. You're not helping anything by normalizing it. You should be the first one to go in there and go, what's that? You had expectations. That must suck. I'm really sorry to hear that. Let's move on with the day, shall we? Just wanted to throw that out there quickly. We're going to take a quick break. I'm going to go smoke a joint, and then we're going to continue with the live call-in show. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This has been a lot of fun, as always. We'll see you soon.
Bye, everyone.